The sun blistered down on a small young face of a male. His shadow stood taller than him. He looked up, putting his bloodied hand over his eyes to stop the sun from burning them as he watched the birds fly out of the nearby tree. His gaze returned to his hands as he slowly finished wiping them on a white shirt, now stained with blood. Sirens pierced his ears and set off alarm bells in his head. Realizing what he was hearing, he desperately grabbed the shirt to wipe the bloody knife, feeling sweat begin to pour over the boy's face. There's no going back now. He climbed out of the ditch that he had previously dug out days prior. Flashbacks of him digging the ditch flickered through his head on repeat, followed by asking the other boys to go on an adventure with him. He clutched the knife in his hand, fearing his world would crumble if he dropped it. His body temperature spiked in panic and fear. He still had other things to take care of, like his destructive parents, the other bullies in his school, and the disrespectful neighbors. So many more people he had on the list in his head. The road he was on was dusty and quiet. It was ideal for a body dump. The boy flickered a smile as he ran, thinking how easy it was to lure his so-called friends there and kill them. His mind flew back to the road, and he made a sharp right, turning into his dusty walkway, motioning up to the front door. The kids in the playground laughed, unaware of the danger around them. Hendrix was a small boy, with blonde hair and green eyes. He was a cheerful lad on the surface. The playground itself was on gray asphalt, basketball court lines sprawled all over it, and some of the boys did indeed play basketball. Even some of the girls. Hendrix, though, he was more interested in books. He wasn't nerdy, but he was intrigued. He enjoyed learning the human behavior. The air was still, evident by the sun as usual. Blistering heat, he had the first button from his shirt undone. The boy was a twig compared to most kids his age, primarily due to his mother's negligence and his father's callous demeanor. While he had friends, he also had lots of bullies. People would snicker and laugh at his hair, or the stain on his shirt, the way he started to sweat during conflicts. The small things. To that extent, he'd had enough. His friends used to talk behind his back. It's not like he hadn't noticed. They, too, were just trying to survive. "You reading your damn books again!" One of the kids walked up behind him. He turned around and nodded at his so-called friends. "You should come with me after school today. I found a cool tunnel yesterday." Both boys looked at Hendrix and nodded silently. Little did they realize it was about to be their end. Stumbling, he reached his hand out of his pocket to fumble with the keys, out of breath as he pushed the key into the lock. He could already hear the screams and shouts from his parents. Taking a deep breath before opening the door, freezing in place as his solemn eyes met his mother's gaze of disgust and resentment. His father was waving the kid off while his mother scolded him for being home late. The boy unsheathed the knife as his mother turned her back on him. Big mistake. She spat venomous words at her young son, slowly creeping up on his next victim. She may be bigger than him, but he was faster. Rule number 1 his father had taught him. Never turn your back on the enemy. The neighbors had called the police to investigate the screams and shouting coming from the young boy's house. But when the police arrived, the door was wide open, and there were bloodied footprints leading to the living room. This in turn caused the men to upholster their weapons. One of them had signaled the other to split off and go around back as the first slowly stepped into the house with his gun drawn and reached the living room. And what a sight it was! He hadn't cleared the other rooms as he had figured the place was empty, not quite realizing that the other room was occupied by the assailant, who was very much aware of their presence. An older woman in her late 30s, laying on the floor with knife wounds to the back and throat. her clothes stained with blood, as well as broken bottles over the cream carpet that soaked up the liquid from the bottles like a sponge. He leaned down to check the woman's pulse, just in case. And that's when it happened. He felt something stab him in the neck. Damn, had he been too focused on the scene to realize the person was still there? Arterial spray hit the walls as the kid pulled the knife down. He watched the man slowly turn around as he grinned slyly at the bloke. What the hell? He was just a kid. How had he not noticed? He gurgled, trying to get the boy, who slightly leapt back, turning around as he walked out the front room door frame through the front of the house as he slowly crept up on the other bloke, investigating the back of the house. Creeping along the side wall as the agonizing weight to kill again proved too much for the kid to handle. The other officer looked at the body as he too went to check the pulse of the man, not realizing the monster behind him a few meters away, as he rummaged through the pockets to find some kind of ID. The man in his 40s lay on the ground in a heap. A fallen ladder lay near the fence, flattening some of the taller blades of grass, smothering parts of the ladder from view. He radioed for an extra unit, but was cut off mid-point as he felt something jab him in the back. Pain was the next thing he felt. He dropped his gun in an attempt to feel his back as he slowly turned around, being smacked in the face by a metal pipe and falling flat on his back as his ears rang. The kid stood over the bloke for a few seconds before picking the gun up and firing a round into the man's leg, gaining a scream from the officer. The kid grinned a little more as he places another round into the man's shoulder, before placing one in the back of the head as the officer tries to crawl away. The boy stares as he slowly drops the gun on the grass as he slowly walks back to the house to clean up. Minutes pass as the kid cleans his hands a little, putting the knife down in the sink to clean as he goes to sit at the kitchen table. Completely oblivious to his surroundings, caught in a hazy daydream, perhaps. The officer earlier had radioed for a special ops unit due to the violence and the bloodshed. And so, the hunt began. The unit that had been called to investigate was already on its way, with orders to wait for their lieutenant. Devising a plan on the way to the house as they look at a satellite overview. A tall, blonde-haired man had gotten off an A-10, throwing his military carrier down on the floor. As he plasters his large hands over his pockets to find his phone. Everything on his person had a specific spot. All the time. He hated not knowing where things were. Pushing his hand into his right side pocket as he answers the call.
Yeah?
Roughed and sandpapered, his voice hadn't been used in a while by the sound of it. The air around him was hot and humid right now. He'd been sitting on an aircraft for the last 18 hours. He really needed a shower. And given how he had his other hand loosely around the strap of the heavy bag he was carrying over his shoulder, he was probably not in the mood for games. The bloke still had a rifle over his shoulder. It was dirty. Sand and dirt covered most of the parts, most of it dried, hadn't had a chance to clean it, probably because he had fallen asleep at some point during the 18-hour flight he'd just gotten off of. Usually he'd clean it on his way home, but he had a few target packets to look at whilst he was flying, so he had more pressing matters to attend. He still had his gear on, still had his mask on, though only covering his lower face. His commander was calling on a last-minute shit show, the slight rustle of metal against metal as he walked away, looking at the sky as he curses at the sun for making it hot and gross, squinting as he covers his eyes a little. There wasn't a cloud in sight, no breeze. Sure, it made shooting a hell of a lot easier, but goddamn did he hate it. So here he was, standing around once again, as he waits for the man on the other end to assumptively give him orders. He had to contend with the heat, and now He had someone on the phone telling him he needed him to do a small favor.
I just got a call from a unit about a serial killer. 2 cops are down at least, and they want assistance. You're the closest. Get to it.